This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.
Welcome to the OI podcast, the Otago Institute podcast, in-depth conversations with experts from the worlds of arts, sciences and mataranga Māori, brought to you by the Otago Institute, the Otago branch of the Royal Society for Arts and Sciences. Kia ora, I'm Dr. Barb, and today's show is called Getting It in Your Head, and we're in conversation with Professor John Reynolds. Kia ora, John.
Kia ora, how are you?
Hey, thank you so much for coming along. It's amazing to have you here in the studio with us.
Thank you for asking.
And it's a very exciting talk, and it's something that I really am keen to know more about, because I know that I've kind of known you for a while now. But yeah, we don't get enough time to just sit and talk about what our respective fields are. And this is all about, it's a sort of a broad discussion that we're planning on having here today, because it's quite exciting, your research. New methods for delivering drugs to the brain to improve the treatment of brain disorders. So there's quite a lot in that, just as even that's quite a concise headline there for getting it into your head. So I guess the first big question is, why is it an issue? Why is it difficult to deliver drugs to your brain?
Good question. That's why we're here. So the brain is a very interesting organ, right? So it controls all the things that we do, our thinking, our listening, our moving, our sensing. And it has to be very highly protected. It's got to be protected from threats, things that can get into the bloodstream, that can that could affect our brain circuits and our thinking.
So things like bacteria, viruses,
all the
fungi,
all
I guess, as well, parasites.
Anything that can get in. So, of course, those organisms you just mentioned do get in the bloodstream, and they do go along and they cause us to have infections and colds, etc. But we really want our brain to be highly protected. So what the brain has developed is a very highly specialised set of blood vessels, the vessels that carry the blood throughout the brain. So the brain is packed full of blood vessels all the way through. But these blood vessels are different because they don't deliberately leak at certain times to allow things to go out into the brain or to pick things back up from the brain.
So other blood vessels do?
Other blood vessels do throughout all of your organs.
Oh, wow. So they're just leaking all the time?
Well, in a physiological controlled manner. So if we take an antibiotic and we want to get it into some place where there's infection, we'll take that. It will go into the bloodstream. It pretty well goes to all of the organs, but the ones that need to kill the bugs, because the bugs are in that place, the drug will get in easily and kill the
How does the drug know that that's where it's needed?
It doesn't.
They're not sentient, are they?
No, there are specialisations that you can have in drugs, so they target certain areas of the brain. Areas of the body. Thank you. But in terms of the brain, the blood vessels have got these very, very tight connections between the cells that hold the blood in.
Right.
And this is abnormal. This only happens in the brain. And it's a barrier between the brain substance and the bloodstream, which we call the blood-brain barrier, or BBB, if I say that a couple of times.
BBB. See, now BBB. I'm Barb, so BBB sounds really good. Have you seen that? It's all the rave at the moment. There's a meme going around about Barbara's rhubarb bar.
No, I can't.
You've got to look it up. It's absolutely hilarious.
BRB, right? Okay.
Yeah. Anyways, because it's all about barbarians and Barbara's rhubarb, which is Barbara. Barbara, and it's in German, so it's really funny.
I will look that up.
Anyway, it's a bit like the BBB. So just to get that in your head, guys, it's the BBB. So it's the blood-brain barrier.
Blood-brain barrier. So it's designed by whoever designed it to be a way of protecting the brain from getting bad things in. But unfortunately...
Oh, you mean by evolution?
Yeah. We won't scoot into areas that you're an expert and I'm not.
Okay, sorry. So
who invented it? Yes.
Yeah.
But the trouble with the blood-brain barrier, the disservice that it does us is that we can't get things we want to get in there, like molecules or bits of bits of tissue, etc., that we want to get into the brain to treat certain conditions. Because it's so tight, there's a limit to the size of the molecule that will go in, the charge of the molecules, all sorts of things that stop it.
So normally when you've got things floating around in your bloodstream, like antibiotics or any sort of medicine basically that you take as a tablet, and you sort of swallow it, it goes into your stomach, and then it goes from your stomach
into your duodenum, and that's where most of our absorption happens.
And so from there it goes into your bloodstream from the duodenum, which is like your small intestine, right?
That's right. And some parts of it later on.
You're
asking me stuff I learned at med school a million years ago, but that's all right.
Yeah, okay. So
apologies to the gastro
and it's going.
here.
So it's going through, like when you get intestines, I don't know how many people out there have seen intestines, but if you go to your local butchers and you look for the sausage casings of old, that's your intestines, right? So you've got this kind of layer, and different medicines are going through those different linings at different places based on
They're
how fast they go
specially.
through. So the medicines are designed specially, as how they absorb them. And that's why they say when you take antibiotics, take with food or with a big glass of water or something, it's all about...
Often it's to stop you feeling sick or nauseated. Yeah. But also sometimes it's to stop the stomach or other places denaturing the drug.
So it's interesting, isn't it?
So it's a thing that the pharmacologists call, bioavailability, how much is actually getting through there and active and available for the body.
And I guess the other big thing is the coating around the medicine, because that sort of it's either, stays there longer or not, depending. It's so that it keeps the stuff inside the capsule or the tablet intact longer, so that it's released at a different point.
So clever pharmacologists can make things that are slow release, they call it. So you might see a drug name that you might have that's got SR on it. So it's slow release, and it's designed for that very purpose, to allow it to come in smaller levels so that your bloodstream has it around for longer.
Right. And then... So they're then going through these layers of tissue into your bloodstream, and then flowing through your bloodstream everywhere, and then going out at another place from the bloodstream normally. And they're kind of going out because they're quite small, and it's like going through different...
It doesn't matter too much, not as much as the brain. The size isn't quite that important.
Right.
It depends on the pressure. So you're taking me right back to secondary physiology here. This is not what I'm an expert area in. So apologies to the medical students who are listening.
Sorry.
But no, there's the capillaries, the little tiny blood vessels that are in all of the organs. They have a kind of a pressure gradient that sort of controls.
Course,
and
so you've got
pressure,
the big arteries that come out, and they're under high pressure, and then as it goes out to sort of more extreme areas,
it slows down the blood flow, so there's more time,
and there's more time for it to go out. That makes sense. Okay, so then the brain is a totally different thing, because the brain is just more secure. So it's like, if you're talking medieval castles, that would be your castle keep, right?
Ooh, yeah.
So it's like they've got the most protection. It's got those big strong walls around it, and it's really keeping everything out.
It's not only the cells that make up the bloodstream. It's actually specialised cells around those the bloodstream, like things called astrocytes and pericytes, if you want the names. And they are specially designed. So the astrocytes got little feet. Wow. And the little feet kind of sit really closely to these blood vessels and allow some things to go through them and some not. Oh. And the thing that's clever about the brain is it knows what it wants.
How?
It wants glucose. Oh, no, ask a blood-brain barrier physiologist. It's not out of scope. It's only out of scope because I can't tell you the answer.
It's probably some sort of gradient layer or something. There are various things that are controlled, but you can pull in glucose into the brain when it's needed. So when you exercise or do something, because obviously the brain does need to exchange things, right? Because that's the function of the bloodstream otherwise. So it's not that it hasn't got any ability to exchange things across that blood-brain barrier. It's just that it's a very specialised one.
Yeah, because not only is it... So small molecules will go in kind of easily. Drugs that are dissolvable in fats, like lipids, dissolvable in fats or lipids like anaesthetics, certain drugs of abuse, etc., they very easily will go in. So anaesthetics, you can give you an anaesthetic dose and it'll go straight in and you'll go like this.
Right, and that's because your brain is mostly made of lipids?
Lipids, those cells are made of lipids. But then there are also these little specialised transporters that are constantly working all day going, I'll let that drug in because it fits on my lock-in key, and I'll carry it through and in.
Right.
And so that's designed. So there's a transport, as they're called. So there's all these amazing mechanism. But overall, if we want to treat something like a brain cancer or do a gene therapy, etc., those molecules are large, they don't fit in all the other categories that I've got, and they don't like to go in.
Right.
So we have a problem about delivering drugs to the brain the way we want them and how they get in.
Right. So it's drugs. It's not just all drugs. It's drugs for specific things.
Yeah. So this is one of the reasons. So they say I think the figure quoted sort of like, you'll read things in the newspaper. Oh, in Australia or even Otago, they've found this amazing drug that will control parts of the brain circuit that could be really useful for disease X.
Yeah.
But a lot of that work's been done in slices of brain because we've got to start somewhere, in vitro we call it. And when we try to go to a whole living organism and getting it in there, that's when it fails. So many of those things that you hear about.
You can know that the drug actually would work if it could get there.
That's exactly right.
But it's actually safely getting the drug to the place where it's needed for it to be effective.
Brain cancer is a really important example, if I can shift onto that. So there are really great drugs, chemotherapeutic drugs that would treat cancer really well, brain cancer, if we could get them in at high enough levels.
Wow.
So what happens is, because of this blood-brain barrier, actually it's interesting because brain tumours actually have the blood vessels in them. It's called the blood tumour barrier. They're actually more leaky. So you'd think, hey, hooray, success. But they're only leaky to a certain degree. They'll let some of it go in, but then they'll stop. So what you have to do to get more drug into that area is give the person higher doses.
Right.
Now you'll know what happens.
And then you get all the side effects.
All of the we call it the off-target effects, the hair falling out, vaginal epithelium sloughing off, all these terrible things that can happen.
But it is really good that there is a big difference between the tumour and the brain tissues, right? Because that lets you...
Some, but not enough.
That does let you... make something it's easier to spot. It's easier to make a medication to target something that's different. Yeah, and I guess the more different, but it's not different enough.
It's got to kill us. This is a drug. These are drugs that have to kill cells that are they live their life happily dividing rapidly.
Yeah.
Because they're formed. Some mutations happen along the way. I know you know all about this stuff.
Yeah.
Some mutations happen and off they go, dividing, growing in a completely uncontrollable way. So they're really busy and hungry.
Right.
All right. And lost my train of thought now, but you can get, we can get drugs in there to actually target the area to a degree, but then they've got to work really hard. They've got to be at high levels to really knock off these tumours. So that's what we do with people who treat brain cancers use chemotherapy agents. But it's very sad. It's very easy, very common not to tolerate those drugs. They make you sick, etc.
So brain cancer then is one of the harder cancers to treat?
Yes, absolutely.
Then because of that blood-brain barrier and because it's so hard to get the amounts in necessary.
And it's quite common. 200 to 300 people, I think, a year in New Zealand that get cancers of some form in the brain, and most of them are these quite aggressive cancers.
That's amazing. That's a much higher number than I thought, actually. And I guess the other option is obviously surgically remove it, but that has all the difficulties and risks of having surgery on essentially your brain.
I mean, the sort of management side of things isn't my expert area. I've got people in my team who are really great experts like Tanya Slatter. There are people who really know a lot about this and work with humans, with people with brain tumours. But what usually happens is signs and symptoms occur, somebody has a diagnosis made from a scan, and then the surgical and the oncology team have to look in there and see, okay, can we resect it? Can we take it out?
Right.
If it's too deep or near blood vessels, it's much harder to take out, and that can be very, very bad news. Or it can be resectable, but the trouble with these, particularly these things called glioblastoma is a very aggressive form of brain cancer and unfortunately very common, is that now you see it on the scan, you do some things to tell it, but really it's growing in places that you can't see because they do tend to and
because it's very 3D, isn't it? Like, I mean, you can take slices of scans, but still the brain has got all those folds and crevices in it, I guess, and little valleys and
but the main thing is you can't really see where it's going.
Yeah.
So the team have to make a decision with the patient and their whānau about what we would do. We would take this amount out and then we would treat with chemotherapy or radiotherapy depending on what the nature of the tumour is.
Can I ask a really Might be a really stupid question.
No, there are no such thing as stupid questions.
Yeah,
I always
honestly.
tell my students.
Yeah, no,
Only
I've been,
bad
I've been
answers.
teaching too long to know that that's
Okay, yes.
If you did surgery and took out like a big lump of cancer, and then there'd be all these little bits that were hard to find.
Could be, yeah.
Could you not just dump like a whole lot, like while you've got it open and you through that blood-brain barrier, could you not like dump a whole lot of medicine in there at
Well,
that
that's not a
point?
silly question. It's exactly what they do, but they do it with chemotherapy or radiotherapy. They know from experience. So what they have to do is take the tumour out, and the tumour's got to go through histology to look and see what kind of tumour is it? What are we dealing with here? And they have incredible experience knowing what drug or what regimen for radiotherapy would work best for that tumour. So they know and they make a diagnosis. And then they will know from history, well, look, we'll go 1 centimetre around it or whatever that is. So they do. They'll give chemotherapy. Otherwise, if you had all the tumour out, why would you bother giving radiotherapy or chemotherapy?
Exactly, yeah.
But they know that they can grow aggressively.
Right.
And I
so
just want
any
to take
little
a note.
bit that you leave behind that you can't get, and you're unlikely to be able to get it all at once.
Yeah.
And of course, you don't want to, like if you've got a melanoma, they'll just take a big whack around it so they know they've got it all if it's on your back or your arm or something. But of course, you don't want to be doing that in the brain because every little bit...
That's a good point, because you lose function when you take part of the brain. I just wanted to stop a second just to take a note that I know that there are people listening that will be living with this or their whānau, and I know what a terribly tragic diagnosis it is. But we're all working very hard to try and do our best for this. So, my thoughts are with you. So if I talk a little clinically, it's just to sort of answer the questions and explain.
Yeah.
So,
And probably I should have said that as a trigger warning at the start of the episode. Usually I start the episodes with sort of
You got
saying
too excited.
I know, I got too excited. I always do that. I just bounce all over the place like a crazy person. Sorry, folks at home. Hey, what we usually do at the start of the episode is we talk about you and how you got into this field of what was your journey? Because and usually I start by saying, John holds a PhD from the University of Otago, and you've had a really exciting kind of wiggly journey to get to where you are and what you're doing. So, tell
I
us
have
about
a
that.
very interesting journey, and I like to talk to students about this because students often come into the university or wherever they come from school, and they really want to do one thing. Like, for example, I used to be the health science first year director, so a lot of students would come in and want to do health science thinking they're going to be doctors, and they find halfway along, this is not what I want to do. And often there's this guilt feeling, I've changed track, it's not is it the right thing to do? So I usually tell this story because I've changed tracks 3 times now, and what I found looking back at it is that each change has added value. The thing we did before to make who I am and where I want to go, and I'm doing the thing I want to do now. But I'm from Hiratonga, Hastings, and I really wanted to do engineering, electronics, because I used to tinker at home, and Dad taught me how to play with valve radios and all sorts of stuff. And
Gosh, that does age you a little bit, doesn't it?
And then we discovered then there was transistors, and I used to mix with a band, so I played a bit of guitar, but so I built PAs and stuff. Which
So
was
what decade was this? The guitar?
1921. No, we're talking early 70s.
Early 70s. Oh yeah, no, that's a classic. It's a classic time for getting into all those amps.
And valves were still useful, still in the output stage.
No,
Anyway.
just because people. I don't think a lot of people realise, but a lot of the how music changes over the decades. A lot of that is driven by technology.
Yeah,
and the whole 70s and the 80s rock was driven by technology, by the amps and the all that stuff that you can before. Even going back, right, you had classical music. All you could play it on was an LP.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know all about the history of everything, but it is part of that. Like you're building on what you had before, and it's all about the circumstances and the environment you're in.
Right.
And I guess that's kind of an analogy to where you're coming from, is that you were interested in the electronics.
Well, I wanted to learn. I wanted to design, and I make that stuff. So I wanted to go to Canterbury.
Why?
Because that's where they do engineering.
Oh, that's where engineering is. Yeah,
I thought, I want to do that.
Everybody does engineering.
And I came from a whānau that did not have history with going to university. So, you just sort of go along your own way. Yep. But I remember talking to the careers advisor in I'm going to say 5th form, sorry, year 13, 12, 11. Year 11. that right? Yeah, 11.
Yeah, 11, yeah.
And he said, what do you want to do? What sub, and I said, I want to go and do engineering in Canterbury. And he said, oh, we're good. You're very good at languages. Because actually in Hastings back then, we had someone who taught us Russian. So I did Russian and French, which was only two schools in New Zealand at that stage that did Russian. One of them was Auckland Grammar. And the other one was my school that was not Auckland Grammar, Hastings boys. So he said, you're really good at French and Russian, so stick with French and Russian. And drop, just keep physics on and drop your chemistry and drop your biology. You don't need it. And I thought, okay, I'll do what he said.
Wow.
And then I got to year 13 and I saw the same guy and I'd written on my form, engineering at Canterbury. And I still remember him distinctly. I remember what he looks like. I remember the sweat dripping down his face. And he went, you won't be able to do engineering because you dropped chemistry. And I said, you told me to.
Oh, my goodness.
So actually, this is an important story because it does show how I got there. So one of the routes he said you can do, because I now know that if I'd just gone to university and focused, it would have been okay. But I didn't know that, and none of my family could help with that experience. So I went and he said, you can get a job and work in electronics, and then you can go into the second professional year of engineering after that and do New Zealand certificate in engineering. So I did that, and that was actually the right thing. I ended up in the hospital at Palmerston North Hospital.
Why was that the
doing
right
electronics thing? Well, you find out because I think it was because I was in the hospital environment.
Oh, I get it.
So I got to know nurses, doctors. I did all the sound mixing for the review and everything. So I got to know all the medical staff, and I really liked it. And I met some fantastic friends who have been my lifelong friends. Helen McGrath, there we are, and Caroline Jones. Helen DeMont, talking names now. And they were my nursing friends. And they said to me, I think, when I've been there a couple of years, you're really good with people. Why don't you go and be a doctor? And I said, I can't. I haven't done biology. I haven't done chemistry. But of course you can. So another message is if you go there and you get the support and you work hard and you make it the big focus. So that led me into medicine. And then I worked in Whangarei for a couple of years as a house surgeon. And as I was older,
So when you were in Whangarei, you just like a GP, like a normal doctor.
No, I was a house surgeon in the university and a senior house officer. But before that, actually, I've skipped the fact that I worked in electronics, industrial electronics medical electronics, actually, for 9 years. So it was a long way before I decided to go. Because even though I got through and stuff, I thought, no, I don't want to go to university anymore yet. And I worked my pathway through. And that's when my
So you had quite a long time working as electronics. But quite a specialised electronics in a hospital environment.
Hospital and also medical companies. So I did a bit of that. And
what kind of electronics? Oh, I suppose all the heart rate things and everything are all...
Oh, no, we were doing things like actually autoclaves and some sensors. And then you go to a certain stage, and no, not disparaging any salespeople there, but that you have to do sales. So I ended up having to go into sales and selling medical equipment, and this was not me.
Yeah.
And that's when my flatmate said, you should think about doing medicine. So I thrust myself into that. And became a doctor, worked in Whangarei for 2 years. And because I was older, I was very interested in working in rehabilitation medicine. This story's nearly over. And so working in rehabilitation medicine, you see people who have had stroke, Parkinson's disease, elderly people who've fallen down need to be rehabilitated. It's a really positive environment. But do you know what? And the doctors are going to hate me for saying this, the doctors can do very little because we can't get drugs in the brain. The people who do the work are the person, their whānau, the nursing staff, the physios, the speech language therapists, the occupational therapists, the social workers, the whole gamut. It's a real multidisciplinary environment. I loved it. Yeah. But the medics... we were fiddling medications. That's all we could really do.
Quite limited.
So I did think, well, okay, why can't we do this? And the two things that came out is, one, we can't get drugs in the brain, and two, we don't understand the brain enough to know how we should replace it. And that has fed what we're doing now. Long story, eh?
No, it's a good story though. No, because I share that whole thing because people. I mean, you get it all the time with people in their final year of doing a degree, and they'll say, I'm thinking of doing a PhD, should I do one? And my standard answer is, if you're not really, really sure that this is the PhD you want to do, then the answer is no. Go and think about it. Yeah. Because doing a PhD is a big commitment. Yep. It's at least 3.5 years of your life. And if you're not interested in that thing at the start, I can guarantee you're not going to be interested at the end. And there's lots of really boring parts in research, like long hours, repetitive stuff, and what gets you through that is that you're passionate about your subject. Agreed. And you're doing it for a reason. And if you can't answer those questions, like I just really want to do this because I want to find out the answer, if it's not then you shouldn't be doing it.
No, I think I advise people similarly.
And I think, that's not to say that you should never do a PhD.
No. But it might not be the right time.
But it might not be the right time in your life. And I think sometimes the best students are the ones that have done a degree and then gone and done something in a working environment and just, had the time to sit and think with their thoughts or work and decide, this is actually not what I want to do. What I want to do is this, and in order to do this, I need a PhD or I need a postgraduate or something. But it just gives you that time to kind of move into so. And I think we shouldn't push people straight from a degree straight into doing a PhD. I think there's sometimes and not all people. Some people
They just know what they're doing.
They just know what they're doing.
I was 33 when I started mine, so I had to be really sure that this is what I really wanted to do to change things. Because I have similar conversations with people thinking about medicine.
Yeah.
Quite often they come the other way. They do a degree or they do a PhD and they want to go and do medicine after. And I have the same conversation. Is this really what you want to do? And usually, almost always, they've been thinking about this since they were 12, or they've had something that's happened in their whānau and they really want to understand it. So the passion.
Yeah.
If anyone's ambivalent, it just seems a logical thing to do, then I would say just don't do it. Right now is the right answer. Wait till you're ready for it.
Do it when you know you want to do it. I had ages and ages back when I was in first year, I had a chemistry lab partner. And she absolutely hated it, and she just had no interest in it at all. And I just said to her, because I didn't do pre-med, but I did a lot of pre-med courses because I was sciences based. And my best friend was actually I met my best friend Judy. Shout out to Judy.
Not giving a surname.
Seeing as we're doing Judy, she's got a funny surname. It's Penny with an E, and I always thought it was. Like Penny's got an E, P-E. It's actually got two E's in it. It's one at the end. So I was best friends with her for like 20 years before I realised I was spelling her name consistently wrong. Anyway, hi Judy. Anyway, so this girl, I said, why are you, she said, I hate science. I hate sciences. I hate it all. I said, what on earth are you doing? What are you doing? She said, she was kind of a B plus, A minus student all the way through high school. And then in her last year of high school, she did fantastically well, and then her parents decided she was doing so fantastically well she should do medicine, and she hated sciences. She hadn't done any science subjects at high school. She'd done languages and art, like really solid good arts, languages, and she was obviously really bright, but she just didn't want to do sciences. And there was something that she couldn't quite get, that like she just felt that she had to do it because she'd got these good marks and her parents had just felt that she should do medicine then.
So did she find her way to something she wanted to do?
I think so. She basically failed pre-med in order that her parents would give up on this crazy idea. But I just think, my heart was just like, that's so sad. Like, it's
if the parents are listening, we're sorry.
Yeah, we're sorry. But yeah.
No, I just on the same vein, just a bit. I mean, I get people coming to me who are thinking about PhDs or masters or whatever, and I love looking at their academic records because you'll see the ones that had terrible first years. One of my most fantastic students, who's now a doctor, incidentally, who had done some papers in science or whatever, and was really disappointed because she had a D in one of her papers from first year. So there are C's and D's and whatever. Next year, B's, A minuses. Next year, A plus all the way. So those are people who've really learnt what they want to do.
Yeah.
And I like people like that. Unfortunately, the scholarship systems don't favour them in terms of getting money, which is a shame because they're often the most motivated people.
Yeah, I entirely agree. And I have had a range of master's students. And the best master's student that I had exactly that academic record. Shout out Max.
Yeah, shout out Natalie. Natalie's now a doctor in Nelson. And
although, to be fair, James is also fantastic. So sorry, James. They were there at the same time. There was this little bit of rivalry going on.
We should stop calling out people's names.
We've got to stop calling out names
person
here.
X, person Y.
Anyway, so I guess the message there really is the key is finding what you're passionate about. And I think that's the key, not just to science, but also to academia, or maybe even just to life in general. And I'm a big fan of Tim Minchin, and he's
great.
Just absolutely love him. But one of the big things he says is you should be I'm going to paraphrase this and get it all wrong.
This is graduation speech, was it? Probably?
No,
Okay.
it's. I love his graduation.
Yeah,
if you
it's
ever
good.
get a chance, you should look up his, what's it called, the 9 something.
Oh, yeah, he
just type in Tim Minchin
And
graduation.
watching the academics at the back going,
it's
some
really
of them are
funny.
laughing, some of them are screwing their heads up because he doesn't mince his words.
No, Anyway, so this story, he's saying, if you've got a dream, you want to do all the dream, then chase the dream, chase the dream, chase the dream. But actually, once you've found the dream, then what are you going to do? And that can be a catch.
Yeah, that's right.
But what he says is to be micro-passionate, be absolutely passionate about what you want to do now and do it. And then if you find out that it's not for you, then you can move on and be micro-passionate about the next thing.
Yeah, it's good. I like it.
Yeah. Anyway, that's the great words from the Tim Minchin. Hey, moving back to what you're actually doing.
Yeah, right. I was thinking you might ask me that. Now that I've set it all up, what did you do?
So we've got back there to the whole thing. So we're talking about getting it in your head, just in case people out there have forgotten what we're talking about. So the subtext to that is new methods for delivering drugs to the brain to improve the treatment of brain disorders. Mm-hmm. Now, brain disorders. So we've talked a little bit about cancer, but what are the main brain disorders that your group are actively working on that you can do something about?
Yep.
And maybe which other ones are there?
So there are two major classes of what we're trying to do. And one of them is getting drugs into the brain, we've talked about. And the other one is getting drugs into the brain at the right timing. Timing is crucial. So, so Parkinson's disease is really the brain disorder, which I've really cut my teeth on in terms of starting and working, and my PhD was all about the dopamine system. So dopamine is the pleasure chemical. It's a reinforcement chemical. You teach your dog to sit, and they sit, and you give them a reward, and they get a big pulse of dopamine. But that's the thing that's lost or missing in Parkinson's disease. So we see outwardly the inability to move. So movement is affected directly because dopamine enables you to move as well as to learn things.
Oh, sorry, I'm just going to interrupt wildly here. Why is moving and reward connected? I don't get that connection.
So it's very interesting. So there seems to be, and it's still not very clear, but there seems to be a residual or a lower level of dopamine that keeps the circuits primed and moving. So in my PhD, we were doing experiments with models where we would remove some of the dopamine and see what happens to circuits. And when you remove the dopamine, the circuits get weak. So the parts of the brain are really deep, and it's a thing called the basal ganglia, right? So
that's
they're
a
right
good name,
deep.
the basal ganglia.
So the basal ganglia are a group of brain areas right in the deep in the brain. And the cortex, that thing over the top that does all the things that we do,
So
like
that's
thinking,
the pink
loving.
blob. That's the pink blob that you see in cartoon characters.
Yeah, so the cortex does all the things that we're thinking about now: listening, thinking, moving, sensing, all those things. Speaking, all those things are driven from the cortex. Many, many, many more. But they communicate with the basal ganglia. The interesting thing is, the basal ganglia is quite small. So if you imagine a couple of almonds sitting side by side.
Oh, right.
But then you imagine that great big cortex all the way over, how big that is. All of those areas talk to the basal ganglia.
Right.
So all of them focus, all of them connect to those tiny little areas. Why is that? It's because that is trying to sample from everything that we're doing. Because the basal ganglia wants to know what we're doing, what we're intending to do, whether we've achieved it or not, so that it can reinforce. So if you think about reinforcing things, like I said about the dog, you say the dog sit, dog doesn't know what to do, so you push her bottom a little bit down to the ground the first time she sits, and you give her the reward, and there's a big pulse of dopamine. And what is that dopamine doing? That dopamine is reinforcing that movement. So there's the link. So it's reinforcing the movement that when my master says sit, and I do that, it ends up with a good thing. So it reinforces that. So logically, if you've got pets, you probably have, you don't give the dog the treat and then say sit. It's because we know it intuitively. So what do they learn? They learn, all I got to do is sit here. He's just gonna give me a reward. Because they don't do anything. Same with kids. We
so
should
never give the rewards to the dogs when they haven't done something.
Exactly. But then after a while, you can't do it every time. So every time you say to your dog, sit, if you were to run to the fridge and give them a treat, it'd be a bit tiring. After a while, the brain learns it. And so you learn enough. You give them enough to say I'll give them one every 3 or 4. Same with kids. Please go and clean your room, and then we'll have ice cream and watch television, and they go and sometimes do that. It's all just the way it works. So that kind of, I think that answers your question, linking reward and movement. It's more actions that are useful to us that result in something that's good.
Yeah. I know, that's interesting. And it's a new learning for me because cognitive behaviour, which you hear if you've got a loved one somewhere with dementia or in care somewhere, you'll hear a lot about cognitive behaviour. And I always thought cognitive is like your brain, right? It's about thinking, cognitive, and you're cogitating.
Yeah, lots of things are cognitive, yeah.
But actually, it includes movement. Like it's all the things that your brain controls.
Yep.
Are cognitive, and you can correct me here wherever I've got this as a lay person. But it's interesting because when you get things like dementia, some forms of dementia, you also get like you can't feed yourself properly, or you can't. There's a whole lot of cognitive impairment. They call it.
See, that's so.
I've probably
sitting in a room of neuroscientists, they just sort of debate that.
Oh yeah, okay. So it's a very layman type idea
is really
of
the processing of information, how you put everything together and make sense of the world, and what you decide to do. So, like what I'm going to do when I leave here is I'm going to walk back. I've probably got plenty of time, so I might have a coffee on the way. So I'm planning. It's a bit of a cognitive function. Whereas what you just described, inability to feed yourself, is actually a motor plan, which is stored in the basal ganglia. So actually what happens, and I know this from personal experience because I have a very dear relative now who's going through dementia, is those functions are generally lost last. So you can find we'll give him some food and he'll be able to do this, right? He'll be able to lift it up and eat. But in terms of processing who we are and whatever, that stuff is gone. So that's more the cognitive side of things. You can have dementias that attack those parts of the brain too, the basal ganglia. There are certain kinds of dementia, and eventually in quite late stage they get affected. So after a while you have to feed people, and very real simplification for those of you experts, but that generally explains it. But what I should tell you about what we're trying to do, I'm nearly there.
Sorry.
Nearly there. Getting a nod from our producer. So we lose dopamine, so we lose movement. So what happens is we give a drug back to restore the dopamine. Makes perfect sense. And you can't give dopamine. Why can't you give dopamine? Because it doesn't cross
the blood-brain barrier.
Blood-brain barrier. Great. There you go. If you give dopamine, it just goes floating around, never goes into the brain. So they give a drug called levodopa, and levodopa does cross the blood-brain barrier.
Right.
And it goes into the brain. But what it does is it goes in and it seeks out the nerve cells that normally make dopamine, and it hops in them. So what's happened? What's happened is when you start getting Parkinson's disease, you've lost about 70% of those cells. So the brain is incredible. It's got
so
circuits protecting circuits and massive resilience. So when you've lost 70 to 80%, you start noticing the slowness of movement and the tremor and the small voice and whatever. So you give someone levodopa, and that levodopa jumps in and finds the ones that are still alive, turns into dopamine, and then releases it at the right time, because all it's doing is functioning the way it normally is.
Because it's not actually giving them the dopamine, it's just making the nerves work.
There you go. It's like recharging. It's recharging the circuit.
Wow, that's really clever.
But
that's really clever.
That was discovered in the 50s by very clever people. You've seen Awakenings. Awakenings is the story of levodopa and how Oliver Sacks decided to use it for people who'd had a terrible virus that had knocked off their dopamine system. But anyway, but what's happened? This is where the story gets sadder. Is that it can do, those of you with Parkinson's, some of you will have experiencing this, it can do, because what's happening is those dopamine cells that are tuning the L-dopa into dopamine are still dying. And as they die away, there are fewer places for the L-dopa to go. So what it tends to do is jump into other cells that are still alive, like serotonin cells, which make dopamine and release it, but they release it at the wrong timing.
Right.
So I say flood the system with dopamine, but it's a simplified way of saying it. So what happens is you get reinforcement of things that you don't want to reinforce. So if you've seen Michael J. Fox in the videos when he started having these things called dyskinesia, which dys means bad, kinesia means movement. So you'll see him on the early videos, he's moving around and Rush Limbaugh, who's now passed away, said terrible things about Michael J. Fox, said he's deliberately not taking his medication so that he can have these terrible movements so he can collect
horrible.
money. Yeah, I know, which is completely the opposite of what actually happens. It's when some people take the medication, it does it. And we think, so now to us, we think that's because the dopamine is coming out at the wrong time.
Right.
So what we are creating is a circuit that will, if need be, open up the blood-brain barrier in a way we want to go, in a place where a tumour is or whatever, so we can allow the right things to get in. We can make it leaky for a short time and it will come right. And we didn't invent this. This has been done internationally with big, big machines. I'll tell you what our difference is. And the other one that is our real intellectual property, if you like, is being able to spot dopamine, etc., dopamine agonists in the right place at the right time.
Wow.
And if we could do that, we should be able to, and there's big claims on the radio, but we should be able to claim, we should be able to stave off the appearance of these terrible movements. And potentially the big claim would be one day maybe we could reverse people who have those terrible abnormal movements.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
It would be amazing. So a long, long way to go. Do you want to know how we're doing it?
Well, are you allowed
question?
to tell us that? On the,
Yeah,
I was
of course I
holding
can.
back because I
Of course I
thought,
can.
well, as soon as you said intellectual property, I was holding back. I was like, I better not ask
No,
that.
I'm not going to tell you all of the fineries, but actually we have patents on these. And just a quick note there, we don't sit there and hide behind patents because we want to get huge amounts of money. The reason we have patents for this thing is that someone is going to have to produce not 1 million, not 10 million, but hundreds of millions of dollars before this would ever move to a point where it would be in clinical trial.
Right.
And usually the market we look at is the US with the FDA, because then it sort of spreads all over. Someone's got to invest that money and they need to make some money. So we protect intellectual property so that the idea is safe for people who do it. But it's not to make researchers money. I've tried pretty quickly to patent as much as we can, so now we can talk very freely and our students can publish and whatever. But anyway, but what we're using is a thing called ultrasound. And ultrasound is any sound waves that we can't hear. Like dogs can hear ultrasound. So you'll hear they blow the whistle and they'll turn around. We lose it from about 20 kilohertz. My age, I can't hear beyond 13 kilohertz. So my kids are going, oh, that noise is awful.
And of course, when you have an ultrasound scan, right?
Yeah, it's ultrasound. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's actually in the megahertz range. So we're using ultrasound, but we're using in a mode called focused ultrasound, where you put this thing on the head and you direct it to where you want to go. You've got to have a bit of gel in there. It goes to the area. And the way we make a nice little timed signal is to package these dopamine drugs in a thing called liposomes. And liposomes are essentially little biological packages. We inject them, they float around, they go into the brain everywhere you want to be, but they don't release the drug until we turn on the ultrasound at the time and the place they want to go. And it works. It works. So
how did you come up with a thing like that? Like, what made you think ultrasound, sound waves?
That's a very good question. We actually, when we started this idea way back in 2009, I had some chemistry friends and myself and my ex-supervisors. We were thinking about magnetism. Maybe you could put magnetism in there, because basically the liposomes have to have a trigger.
Right.
Because otherwise they float around. We don't want them to do anything. They're stealth. They don't know until we tell them what to do.
Right.
So we started.
So you need some sort of a switch.
Yeah, switch on there. And we originally used to have these little magnetic particles on them, and they worked really well. Except you need a 3-phase power supply in your back if you were to ever have that on your head, because the amount of power they need. Right. And then actually it was one of my collaborators who had seen about the ultrasound, and we decided that we would develop a system with ultrasound and liposomes that were sensitive. So we've done that and it works. We've done it in slices, we've done it in animal models, and it works very, very well. So it's taken a lot of work, but we were lucky to get, well, not lucky, actually it took a lot of work, but to get an MBIE program last year to really develop this into
MBIE
a human...
Ministry of Innovation,
Business Innovation Employment,
right, yeah.
So they provide funds, quite big funds, but for things that will generate an economic... First off,
so it's different from the Marsden research grants, because they're sort of things like lasers that we don't know when they're being invented that they're going to be useful until much later.
But there is still we still have to have a science stretch. So we have a science stretch. There's things we've got to work out. But the idea is to bring money into Aotearoa, New Zealand, create jobs, promote industries, and that's what our aim is to do.
So is it possible that New Zealanders with Parkinson's would be the first people in the world to have this drug?
I would certainly hope so. I will tell you where we are going to start. We're going to start with glioblastoma, with cancers, and the main reason is that to have an approval for something new is actually a little easier for something when there isn't anything that's going to necessarily
help it otherwise.
So
if it's the last option and you've got no other option.
So we can test. So we're actually creating a headset that would go on the head.
Right.
Now, I should say to everybody, we did not invent ultrasound permeabilisation or making the blood-brain barrier leaky. It's been known for quite a number of years. But the way it's done...
That was just John waving his hands around and whacking the microphone there.
Did you hear that? The way it's done is you have to have, and I saw this, I collaborate with some people in Madrid, and I've seen this done. They have a big ultrasound thing that sits on here, but it's actually screwed into
your skull.
Well, it's screwed in, yeah, but just from the outside. But you have to have a lot of local sensing, and you've got to sit inside an MRI machine to have it done. Now, that is available now. We'll never have one in Aotearoa, New Zealand. The the neurologists and neurosurgeons I know say we'd never be able to afford it. Wow. It's very expensive. It's about $3 million for the system, and you have to have it in an MRI machine. So you lock up an MRI, and we can't do that in Aotearoa, New Zealand. You can imagine that we would be disadvantaging communities that don't have access to there. So what we're trying to do, and this is the equity part of this, we really want to provide a headset and a way of doing this that's tika, that we would be able to address the appropriate tikanga for Māori communities for doing this in communities with a headset and with a healthcare worker to be able to do things like treat cancer and Parkinson's.
Wow.
So Parkinson's, the answer is yes, we would love to be able to do this first off in New Zealand. It really depends on where the money comes and who's making the bits and pieces, but we will do a trial here as early as we can.
Right. And so, because that's a good point, what things get tried out on for the treatment first. And what you're developing, if I've understood correctly, is really sort of a generalised system that could be useful for a lot of different brain ailments.
So if I sit here and say, oh yes, we could use it for gene therapy, we could use it for Huntington's, we could use it, you're going to think this guy's a bit of a whack job. But
because when people make these big explosive claims, it can be used for this, and the other thing, then it suddenly seems less credible. But if it's actually something, because it's not that you're inventing the medicines, right?
No,
you're actually working on the way of getting medicines that you already know from other people's studies.
Yeah, except that for brain cancer, we are collaborating with someone called Sarah Dearmeyer in biochemistry here, who has got a molecule that potentially could just target glioblastoma. And we met at a little mini conference in the university where I presented first saying we can get drugs in the brain, and then she presented and said, well, I've got this drug, but we can't get it in the brain, John.
Oh my gosh.
So we formed a collaboration.
I'm so glad you said that story, because honestly, there's people out there who just think that conferences are just researchers just running around having dinners in places, but actually, like that networking, that talking to your colleagues from different places and stuff, it's actually really important. And I think there's so much, like people can say, oh, well, you just read the papers, people make the papers, but it's not just that, because there's so much literature out there, and you tend to read quite a specific targeted literature that's relevant to what you're actually doing. Whereas if you're at a conference, you're actually talking to people from similar like close fields, but not exactly what you're doing. And I think it is actually really, and I think it's a really important thing for New Zealanders, because, conferences can be a long way away. They can be expensive to go through. And I think it's really important to actually, you have to go. And, it's jet lag. It's not just a half an afternoon. It's not like you're in London and you can go to Paris, you can go to Europe. Even going to America from the UK is so much easier. I think even specifically coming out of the big COVID lockdowns. I mean, that was a really
That's exactly
big...
what I was going to say. Even though we had Zoom conferences, if you've sat on those all day,
oh my gosh, it's so exhausting.
It's actually the conversations you have in between. So
it's all it's the tea rooms and the the people laugh at the socials at conferences, but
it's good.
But that's actually where you need to be exposed to those other things, and that's just similar fields, different people, different ways of looking at things.
So the thing with what we're doing is we want to go ahead very early for cancer, and we can do it with drugs that are available off the shelf. So there are actually people who make drugs for brain cancers that are already packaged in liposome. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel with FDA. So we could go ahead with that earlier, and then with the drugs that she's creating and other dopamine things that our pharmacy people are packaging now, they can follow a little bit later. But we want to get this going as early as we can.
And when you say as early as we can, what sort of timescales are you looking at there? Because I see things in, I don't know, all things with medicine, it comes out in the media and you think, oh yeah, so next year that's going to be there.
I think we're making good progress. I reckon 2.5 years. I think we'll be able to do a first in human trial in New Zealand. Boy, I don't like putting this on the radio, but I really believe, and that's what I've said publicly, is that with medications that are already available and approved FDA, because if we do a new medication, it's got to go through a huge approval process. Yeah. So ones that are already available, but with our headset, get our headsets approved, we could potentially start looking at first in human trials for cancer. I've talked to one of the neurosurgeons here, Giles Critchley, who's very keen to do this here. I've talked to Catherine Hahn, who's a neuro-oncologist in Auckland, and they are ready with patients as soon as we can do this. But we have to make the technology as good and as safe as possible. Yeah. It works now, but now we've got to make it safe,
Yeah, and I guess that's one of the really big considerations. I think there's a lot of people think, researchers are all about rushing things out and getting it out, and I think
safe.
Yeah, and it's funny when people say that, because I always think you don't know what you're talking about at all when people say things like that, because actually you want it as safe as possible, because you've put a lot of research time and a lot of effort and a lot of energy and a lot of everything from yourself.
First, do no harm.
And then just from a purely research point of view, it's not good for your research to have things go wrong.
No, it would close it down.
It would close it down, right? So you're really wanting success. So you want to make sure that it's as safe as possible, and that you've really double checked everything in what you're doing is actually going to be as safe as possible. So I just think it's important to say that out there, because
I agree.
When you start talking about timescales and stuff, I think people who aren't familiar with the research environment, they kind of don't get the amount of time that goes into getting something.
And it's actually very hard to get safety trials funded, because they're not interesting for funding agencies. They want the new laser that does this. Yeah. So we were very lucky with MBIE that we said we'll do this and we'll do that. We will be able to do it over a 4-year period, so we can do some limited safety trials within there. But usually, to get that to a point of being human ready needs investment and quite a lot of work to be done. So this is why we see these things on the paper, like I've said, or read them in the paper and hear them on TV. There's got this new drug for so and so. It's years before it will get there, and it may fail.
And I guess the defining feature of what you're doing and what you're saying with the timescales there is that the drugs have already done that.
For those ones that we're using.
So you don't have. So in the first step, the first drugs that you're using
are already off the shelf.
The drugs are already there. So the safety work and all that is already done on the drugs. Yeah. So you just have to show that the new method for delivering drugs to the brain is actually safe.
That's it.
And and I guess that's really, really like interdisciplinary and that collaboration, because this is not a small collaboration, is it?
No, we have a huge. So there's 5 labs involved in this around Otago, and
each
we've got
lab
people
has
in Callahan and Wellington. We've got local companies, Kamahi Electronics. Shout out for electronics development; they're really great. We've got engineering firms in Lower Hutt, and there's a whole lot of people who make transducers for ultrasound. Wow. So this is a very multidisciplinary.
And I guess each, like when you're saying a lab there, it's how many people in a lab? It could be 20. It could be
not as many as that, but maybe somewhere between 4 and 10. I think about
I'm thinking, you've got a few postdocs and you've got different people coming through.
I tried very hard to get this funding, and actually what happened was I have a fantastic postdoc called Ashik, and he and I have been through this for the last 4 years, and we've watched our lab go down from 10 or 11 3 years ago down to 3 to 4 to just him and me last year.
Oh my gosh.
So we were on our last legs. We tried this grant for various reasons and get it through, and sometimes it's just things to do with it, sometimes it's political, it happens. But we were very lucky to get that up. So now we've been able to regrow and do this, because I think it would have been all over if we hadn't had this funding.
Wow.
Shout out to MBIE. Don't often get a shout out, but
No, but it is a real thing, because we do have. I think for the OECD, we do have quite a low ratio of research funding. And I think that's not, people think, what are we funding these things and these things? But you do have to fund a mix of things. And when I'm doing grant grant assessing as well. There's so many, the ones that get through, you could easily triple easily triple them and have no decrease in the quality.
So I think I want to make a point on this very quickly, is that that we have some incredible talent in this country, incredibly great scientists, artisans, people who do incredible work, great stuff going on right down the road in Dunedin here. But the money just ain't there, and the investment's not there, and unfortunately it looks like the signals recently are going to be that we're not going to be increasing anymore, and we won't have opportunities to do the things that we could really do.
Well, that's kind of a sad note to leave it on, but that is all we've got time for. Folks, hey, thank you so much for coming along today, John, and we will get you back in 2.5 years, and you can announce here live on OIR. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Barb. Cheers.
You've been listening to the OI podcast, the shout out for the arts, sciences and Mataranga Māori.
You can support this podcast by becoming a member of the OI. Check out the Otago Institute for Arts and Sciences on Facebook or our website.
If you'd like to listen again to this episode or others from the series, look for the OI podcast on ORFM's website, oar.org.nz.
Brought to you by the Otago Institute for Arts and Sciences, the Otago branch of the Royal Society of New Zealand.
This podcast was produced by ORFM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.